Welcome everybody to the Seafish Seafood Rules of Origin webinar. Slight change to the agenda today. At the last minute, Kevin Shakespeare from the Institute of Export and International Trade has been able to join us. He is just going to cover the customs side. So if your goods don't meet the requirements for zero tariffs, there are customs alternatives. So, but he can only make the first 10 minutes. So this is a little bit back to front, but hopefully it won't spoil your enjoyment and you're not on the wrong webinar and you haven't come in at the end. So I will hand over to Kevin now because I don't want to take up any more of his time because he's only got 10 to 15 minutes. So over to you, Kevin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everyone is well and safe. So as Fiona's indicated, I'm going to talk about customs procedures. These slides will be available to you, and some of these slides are more just information about myself and the Institute of Export and International Trade. So I'm not going to focus too much on them because of the time. Now, in the context of UK to EU trade, and I'm focusing on export here, but obviously the reverse can apply from an import side. So EU to Great Britain. Now I'm focusing on Great Britain here, GB, England, Scotland and Wales, because Northern Ireland is subject to specific procedures. So some of you who have heard me before may have heard me obviously referring to some of the requirements here from the 1st of January 2021. And these all arise following the UK leaving the customs union and the single market. So export customs declarations are required, and we'll talk about some of the information required for the declaration. There is also a requirement for an exit safety and security declaration as well. Wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant, so specifically heat treated. And there is clearly requirements for labelling, analysis and goods placed on the market. Certificates and license required, and clearly specifically, as will be referred to today, export health certificates and catch certificates. Carnets for temporary exports and requirements on rules of origin. Again, rules of origin will be covered today. So a number of requirements from an exporter's perspective. And this is moving goods from Great Britain to the European Union, which clearly includes Southern Ireland as well. On the other side, on the import side, import customs declarations are required and an entry safety and security declaration. So if anyone is moving the goods themselves and not using the services of freight forwarder or haulier, it will be your requirements to make the likes of safety and security declarations. And if you were doing that when the goods leave Great Britain, additionally, you would have to register for GVMS, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service. And if you're moving through, for example, Dover-Calais, you would require a Kent passport as well. So there's a number of requirements there, if you're moving the goods yourself. And the other requirements are generally similar, as in terms of ISPM 15 labelling analysis, but additionally there's the requirement for import pre-notification of the Traces NT system for goods moving to the European Union, and requirements on rules of origin. So whilst it's been referred to as zero tariffs in the trade deal, there must be rules of origin requirements met, and there's clearly lots of questions there around what is defined as sufficient or significant transformation of the goods. Just to be clear on that, and it will come out later, is packaging and relabeling is insufficient. That's not sufficient. Things like painting is also insufficient as well. Taking raw materials and putting them into finished goods or ingredients into finished goods is a good example of where there is sufficient processing. Now, in the context of who's responsible for all these different things that are needed, especially the customs declaration, that it depends on the Incoterms used, and some of you may have already heard me refer to this in the context of the 11 Incoterms. And in reality, if your responsibility for arranging the haulage and delivering it to the buyer's premises, then it would probably be either DAP or DDP, delivered duty paid. If your European buyer is collecting the goods from your premises, it could be Ex Works or FCA. If it's ex works, your European buyer will have to obtain a GB EORI number and a GB VAT number, and that clearly could be extra work for the European buyer. So in context, there is a big difference between DDP and that should read DAP, apologies. DDP, the responsibility for customs declarations is at the first point of entry in the European Union, so Calais, Rotterdam, Zeebrugge, for example. Unless the goods are moving under a transit procedure. And if you're selling DDP terms, you will require an EU EORI number and an EU VAT number, which also raises certain implications. I know we've had quite a few questions on this in the past. And the GB exporter will be responsible for any import duties, for example, if the goods don't meet the rules of origin requirements, and also responsible for import VAT. If it's delivered at place, the responsibility for a lot, the declaration, the duty, the VAT, if there's any duty, switch to the European buyer. So clearly it's preferable to try and sell on DAP terms. The reality sometimes is, however, that your European buyer, that might not be acceptable to your European buyer, or your European buyer might be a small market trader who probably doesn't want to get involved in any arrangements. Now, the VAT implications, you would zero rate the export for VAT if there is VAT applying, and it becomes an export. So export zero rated for VAT. When you import into the EU, the import VAT becomes payable immediately upon import, unless there is postponed VAT accounting that applies, for example, in the Netherlands. In some countries, to use postponed VAT accounting, you will require a fiscal representative in the EU. So customs declarations, clearly these documents are really important, not just for the customs declaration, but in this instance, that's what we're referring to. So if you're using a customs intermediary, a freight forwarder, or even a fast parcel operator, if it's moving by air, you are responsible for the declaration and the information provided in that declaration. So having the correct commodity code becomes essential, quoting the INCO terms, a statement on origin as to the origin of the goods, and the likes of gross weight and net weight as well. You may be asked for a packing list, and you would also require a transport document, which the likes of the freight forwarder, fast parcel operator will produce. Now, as I sort of come to end and very happy to take questions here, I'm just going to quickly mention about use of customs procedures. We are seeing a big growth in terms of use of customs special procedures. And a basic principle here is if you bring goods in and pay tariffs, is that you can hold them in a customs special procedure, effectively a duty suspension regime, in which you don't pay duty on the imported goods until they're released into the home economy in Great Britain. If you subsequently re-export, the import duty and import VAT is no longer payable. So when we talk about origin later, just bear in mind that there's been lots of talk around bilateral cumulation in the trade deal between the UK and the EU. Is if you move goods from the EU to the UK or GB and then move them on, say, to Southern Ireland, for example, then if it's a secondary movement with no processing, those goods will be subject to tariffs when they enter Southern Ireland in our example. If you hold the goods under duty suspension, such as a customs warehouse, you will not, effectively, there will be no tariffs when those goods move to Ireland. So that's something, a possibility that a lot of businesses are looking at the moment, if there's no processing in Great Britain, so effectively for distribution type businesses. So finally, just a word about the Institute. You'll have these slides. Is clearly at the moment we're receiving an enormous amount of questions and providing services. We have courses on the likes of rules of origin, on customs warehousing. We're also taking a number of businesses through the likes of customs warehousing authorization at the moment, so they can benefit from the points I've just mentioned. And we also have 30-minute trade surgeries. These are member. There are also member benefits we provide to the institute as well. And clearly, we're having to prioritise our members, our significant member base at the moment, in terms of offering support in terms of trading arrangements. But we also have these courses and these trade surgeries as well, which obviously non-members can use. Members, it's a discounted rate. So that's really it from me, and I know that's been quick, but I know there'll be questions on rules of origin which will come up today, but happy to take questions on the points I've just referred to.
As many of you know, we did take questions in advance of the session. We have had some questions through for Kevin already, so if Kevin, you don't mind, I'll start with them. So the first question we have had is there any information on customs declarations required for direct landings from UK flagged vessels into the EU?
I think we'd need to take part of this one away. So we're hearing sort of slightly different stories in this this need. So I can answer probably. I've seen the question, parts of the questions. If customs declarations are required, how do I make them? So clearly, you can use the services of a freight forwarder or an agent to make them on your behalf. But if you're carrying the goods yourself, then you might use a separate customs agent, because there wouldn't be a freight forwarder. And I know customs agents can be hard to find. You can possibly do it yourself. There was a grant scheme to help businesses do that, but that grant scheme has now ended. We're not sure whether there'll be a new grant scheme. We're waiting to hear. But you would then effectively have to purchase software to interface to the UK Customs Declaration System Chief, which is currently being used for GB to EU. And you would have to purchase what's called badges from community software providers. And that the number of badges required depends which port you're going to use. There are 5 what we call CSPs, community software providers. Some of those cover the big container ports, but generally if it's a smaller port you'll use, it's one community software provider you use. But you would also need, if you're carrying the goods, GVMS, you need to register for GVMS, the Goods Vehicle Movement Service as well. So a number of considerations there that in that regard.
We've had a question come through on the chat. Is there a customs procedure whereby we can bring frozen seafood to the UK and either send it uncleared to the EU for specialised storage before returning it to the UK for clearing in the UK? Or is there a way that we can actually import the same seafood into the UK and then send it for specialised storage?
Yeah, I, again, probably need to understand, but the basic principle is if you're bringing goods in from the EU and sending the goods in the same condition back to the EU, that there'll be no processing and tariffs will apply when they go back to the EU. If you, in terms of specialist procedures, if you put them into a customs approved warehouse, then, sorry, if the goods are from Asia, so I've seen the question there. So if the goods are from Asia, then if it's say China or Thailand or Taiwan or somewhere like that, what you can do is you can bring the goods into a customs warehouse, so they're in duty suspension, and if you're then sending them to the EU, you are effectively not paying the import duty and import VAT. If it comes from somewhere like Japan or South Korea where there is a trade deal, then obviously that the import duty doesn't apply. So you can use a customs warehouse in that example. With regard to going back to the EU, you would effectively, import duties would apply in the EU because the origin is of Asian origin. The only way that it could become of UK origin if you are taking some form of transformation. If you're passing the goods on, then it remains of Asian origin and tariffs will apply. But at least if you use a customs warehouse, you're not paying tariffs on the import side.
Another question from Michelle. With regards to your point on secondary movement, if you want to move goods to Ireland, which have already been cleared in the UK, would they be subject to customs duties, even if the country of origin of the goods is a country which has a free trade agreement with the EU?
So again, not sure what country we're looking at here. So if you're bringing the goods in from, I don't know, let's say South Africa as an example, where there is a trade deal with the EU. You're bringing the goods in from South Africa to the United Kingdom. I don't know, is it possible that could just mention which country it is or not? What would happen there is if there's a trade continuity agreement between the UK and that country, which there is for a high number of countries, then there will be no import duties on those goods coming into the United Kingdom, depending which country clearly we're talking about here. If you're then moving them to Ireland, those goods, however, remain unless you're carrying out a process. Those goods remain of that country's origin. So South Africa, using our example, they are not of UK origin, and tariffs would apply on those goods moving into Ireland, unless you are carrying out some form of processing. And just to be clear, packaging and labelling is insufficient processing.
So we'll move on to Fiona. Thank you very much for your time, Kevin.
Thank you.
Appreciated as always. I'll hand over to Fiona.
This is going to be a high-level presentation of the end-to-end process. So if there are aspects of it that you need more detail on, we can come back and we could do a more specific webinar, but we wanted to give you the whole picture and the end-to-end process today. And then I'm going to cover the basic rules of origin, so where it hasn't been processed, and then Ivan will follow on with what happens when you process it and bilateral cumulation, some of which Kevin did allude to, but we're going to go into it in more detail for you. So this is about the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which was announced on Christmas Eve, and lots of the papers saying we're going to have free trade between the EU and the UK, and you know, isn't this great, we've got a deal. However, what does a free trade agreement mean? It's actually quite narrow, and it's very important that you understand whether it applies to your goods or not. So I'm going to explain in my part of the presentation what happens if you don't apply any processing, and we'll come to the processing later. So what free trade means in the TCA is that EU goods here, they're French goods, just to fit it on the slide. EU goods can go to the UK tariff-free, and UK goods can go to the EU tariff-free. It does not mean that EU goods that are already in the UK can go back to the EU tariff-free, and in the same way, EU goods which are in the, did I say that one? EU goods that are in the UK cannot go back to the EU tariff-free. It's only one way. It also doesn't apply to rest of world goods. Rest of world goods that are in the EU or the UK will be charged tariffs to go to the other country. And also it doesn't apply to countries where we have already got a trade agreement. So this is where, so I'm getting a mess here. It doesn't apply to other countries that we have a trade agreement with. So the EU and the UK both have a trade agreement with Norway for tariff-free trade, but that doesn't mean that you can then move those goods back to the other country. That would be a diagonal agreement, and the rules of origin don't allow for that. So just to remind you, because I messed that up slightly, the free trade agreement only applies for the first movement. So UK goods can go to the EU and EU goods can go to the UK. Products from other countries such as Norway or other third countries, if they come into the UK or the EU without tariff, you can't then move them into the other territory without having a tariff. So it's a very, very narrow thing. So why does origin matter? So origin matters to you because if you are importing something to the UK from the EU and it's of UK origin or non-EU origin, you will have to pay a tariff. And also if your customer is outside of the UK and your goods are not UK origin, they will have to pay a tariff. And also you've got to remember that because this is a customs tariff, it can be backdated for 4 years. So you might be doing it now and not getting charged, but it doesn't mean they won't come and audit you and you'll get a bill later. So you might also say, well, I don't export to the EU, so why does it matter to me? The reasons it might matter to you, it might not. If you're importing and you're supplying fish and chip shops, then it's staying in the UK and it isn't going to concern you. However, if your customers that you're selling on to in the UK then decide they want to sell to the EU, they may come back and ask you for an origin statement, and so they can prove that their goods are UK originating, and we'll cover origin statements later. And also, if that's your customer comes to you and they want to export their goods as UK originating, and you're selling them EU fish or stateless fish, they may go somewhere else so that their product doesn't get a tariff when they export it. So even if you think it doesn't apply to you, you must think about where you're selling on. So it's very important when you're buying your fish that you consider what the origin is and the implications for that for your further trade. And it would be nice if they came with little flags and shirts. However, how you determine this, I've called it the hierarchy of origin, and so the order of importance. So the first one would be farmed fish, and here, much like terrestrial farming, the country of farming is the origin of the fish. That one's quite straightforward. Secondly, if they're wild caught and they're caught in territorial waters, they will take on the nationality of the territorial water. If they're in international waters, they will then have the vessel nationality. The port of landing is not relevant. So just because you're buying it in the UK, it doesn't necessarily mean it's UK fish. So make sure, if it matters to your supply chain, that you make sure that you're buying the right fish. So I've made it in little pictures as well for you. So in territorial waters, all the fish are UK fish. It doesn't matter what vessel they are caught by, they remain UK fish. And conversely, in international waters, the fish don't have any origin until they get on the vessel, and then they have the vessel origin. I'll try to put this in a table, but I'm going to need notes for this because I'll confuse myself. In the first row of this table, the fish are caught in UK waters by any vessel, and they're landed into the UK and no tariff is due. UK fish, UK landing, no tariff. They can then be exported to the EU without tariffs. So that's their first movement within the TCA. In the second row, the same vessels fishing in EU waters and landing into the UK. Again, there's no tariffs here, but this is EU fish being landed into the UK. So that's under the TCA, and so no tariffs apply. However, if you then try and export that to the EU, we're back to EU fish in the UK being exported to the EU, or stateless fish, and therefore you would have a tariff. In international waters, the fish caught by the UK vessels landed into the UK, obviously a UK vessel landing into the UK, and then when you go to export to the EU, that's the first movement to the EU, no tariff applies. The same fish caught by an EU vessel and landing into the UK, that would be the first import tariff-free under the TCA. But again, if you try and export that to the EU, you'll then get a tariff. In the final row, third country vessels in international waters are outside of the TCA completely, and therefore they would attract a tariff on landing into the UK and further tariffs on exporting to the EU. However, it is likely that other free trade agreements would apply on the first landing, so it would only be the subsequent one into the EU that would be tariff. But as we're just talking about the TCA, that one would be outside. So what's really important for you is to consider when the status of the fish when you're buying it at direct landing or import, which is the fourth column, to make sure that you know whether the fish is EU or UK if you intend to move it on without further processing. I'll also just cover Northern Ireland. So all fish landed into Northern Ireland by UK vessels are UK fish. And if it moves to GB, that's under unfettered access. So that's outside of this as well. So therefore, any fish landed into Northern Ireland by UK vessels, if they are moved into GB, will be treated as if they've been directly landed into the UK by a UK vessel. So there's no complications with Northern Ireland. Or I've also been asked about Norway, and Norway's a little bit more complicated. So if a UK or an EU vessel is landing into Norway, and if it clears customs, that's really important to remember. This is only if things clear customs. This fish becomes stateless, and therefore it would attract a tariff if you then try and move it into the UK or the EU. However, there is the Norwegian trade agreement, and there is also transit. And in most cases, I think anybody doing that would probably be doing it under transit. So I'm not going to go into any more detail on that one, but just to make you aware that it's sort of the rules apply. So that is my part of the presentation. Like I said, this was just what happens if you don't do any processing and you're just moving fish around. Ivan is now going to cover cumulation and sufficient processing, which is any of the EU and UK fish are subject to a bilateral agreement and can be processed and can change their origin. I forgot to mention that Norwegian fish or other third country fish, it doesn't matter how much processing you do, they will still won't change their origin, and there will still be a tariff. But Ivan will cover that. Over to Ivan.
So I'll be talking about the rules of origin and how they apply specifically to seafood. I'll go over a lot of what Fiona said already, maybe in a little bit more detail, and I'll talk about the principle of cumulation, whether production is sufficient or insufficient to give a product tariff-free status, and finally, how you prove origin. Sorry, so let's dive straight into the rules of origin. Just to remind you, origin is important in the context of the EU-UK trade deal, the TCA, because tariff-free trade can only take place between the UK and the EU if the products have EU origin or UK origin. And this is why it has to be defined so carefully. So first of all, something that is obvious. So fish farmed in the UK, caught in the UK, caught in international waters by UK vessels. These are all what we call wholly obtained in the UK. So no problem there. That can just be moved into the EU without tariff. The same goes with EU fish. If it's EU origin, it can be traded with the UK tariff-free. Now, this one is obvious as well. So products produced in that party exclusively from the originating materials in that party. So if you have UK fish, you produce a fish product from it in the UK, it remains UK fish. And same way, EU fish that's been processed or treated in any way remains EU fish if it's treated in the EU. So there's no issue with sufficient or insufficient production in this situation. UK fish in the UK remains UK fish if you process it, and the same if you don't process it. And it can go to Europe tariff-free. And it also works the other way around. And finally, there's the situation with product-specific rules of origin. Now, there are a couple of rules for fish that allows certain products made from non-UK, non-EU fish to become UK originating or EU originating. And I'll come to that later. Now, cumulation, this is a rule of origin that allows a product to change its origin. So in the EU-UK trade deal, if you move UK fish into the EU and the fish undergoes production, it becomes an EU originating product. And since it is now EU originating, you can import it back into the UK tariff-free. And it works the other way. If you move EU fish into the UK, then you produce a product from it, and that product becomes UK origin fish and can be exported tariff-free back into the EU. And now the word production has a very specific meaning under cumulation. So the trade deal lists many operations that are not sufficient to be called production. For example, simple cutting or simply attaching a label. And I have a load of slides that come up later on and I'll go through what these kinds of production can be and what they can't be. But first, I want to go over again exactly what cumulation means. So, so you can export fish from the UK tariff-free to the EU, whether it's unprocessed, processed, highly processed, or whatever. That's straightforward enough. You can export EU fish to the UK duty-free in the same way. But what if that EU fish is imported into the UK, is kept for a while in the UK, and then is returned to the EU at a later date without having done anything to it? The fish hasn't undergone production, so it hasn't become UK originating through cumulation. So this is where you get the grey coloured fish, which Fiona originally referred to as stateless. It's not exactly stateless, but you can't call it UK fish and you can't call it EU fish for the purpose of the trade deal. And it doesn't seem logical at all, but that fish is simply not covered by the trade deal, and there'll be a tariff if it enters the EU. And this isn't some sort of mistake or oversight in the trade deal. The deal has been carefully negotiated, and the people who negotiated that deal knew exactly that this would happen. So it is part of the deal. And of course, just underneath that, fish that has undergone cumulation through sufficient production, and this is depicted by that shelf-ready fish product over there, there will not be any import duty to pay because that fish has been transformed. It has undergone sufficient production. So this slide just shows that trade in the opposite direction follows the same rule. So UK fish that is simply stored, hasn't undergone sufficient production, that is depicted by the grey stateless fish that's coming back to the UK, and it will attract a tariff. Whereas if you make that product there, the poisson à la parisienne, from the UK fish, then it can enter the UK tariff-free. This is what it looks like in words without all those icons. EU fish moved to the UK will require sufficient production while inside the UK before being shipped back to the EU. Otherwise, it will attract a tariff. It's the same with UK fish sent to the EU. Now, I said the word production has a very specific meaning on accumulation, and that you have insufficient and sufficient production. So first I'll mention the insufficient production that is listed in the TCA, the UK and EU Trade and Cooperation TCA, because that's what we've been doing for quite a while now, regulation. So this is all taken straight from the TCA. It's not my interpretation. This is actually written in black and white into the agreement. So preserving operations like chilling, freezing, drying, and keeping in brine are deemed insufficient. But pickling, drying, or smoking that's intended to give a product special or different characteristics, that is deemed sufficient production. And that is also straight from the TCA. So if you dry fish and you give it a special characteristic, for example, you make it ambient stable, or it's got particular eating properties, that would be beyond insufficient, to use the jargon. It would be sufficient for it to be for it to be re-exported tariff-free. Now, here's a list of other operations. And again, these are listed in the TCA, and I've copied them almost word for word. So we've got breaking up or assembly of packages, washing, cleaning, simple cutting, simple packing, fixing marks, and labels, or printing marks and labels, simple mixing of products, and slaughter of animals. Now, the word simple has a special meaning in the TCA for this particular list. So simple operations are those that don't need any special skills or special machinery. So, for example, cutting that requires a skill like filleting, that isn't simple. Cutting frozen blocks with a bandsaw, that requires special machinery and probably a special skill as well, so that you don't cut yourself. And vacuum packing requires a machine and maybe even a skill to use it properly. So all of those would go beyond insufficient production. So let's take a look. Oh, that's just to show you what simple means. Let's take a look at some processes specific to fishery products. Heading and gutting of fish. Now that seems to me to need some special skills. I've gutted fish while I was out on fishing boats myself, and it's definitely something that you learn. And I can tell you, I never learned how to gut a skate. That was always left to other people with a lot more experience. So it's most likely to be sufficient production, just heading and gutting fish. Now, simple cutting, if you've got a fillet and you cut it into smaller portions, it's not going to qualify as sufficient. And it's got, I put the word simple in there because that is exactly what it is. You're not using any skill in this particular case, so that wouldn't count as sufficient. But trimming, on the other hand, that can be quite skilled. And if you consider that trimming is usually only one of lots of other processes that you're doing on the fish, then the whole combination of processes, you could probably use that to argue that you have done sufficient production on that. Now, bagging or wrapping, that's probably too simple as well. I'm sure there might be some exceptions to this, and you might have to look at these on a case-by-case basis and form the argument yourself. But let's say it's too simple and that's not sufficient. Shellfish depuration. Now, this is a strange one, and depuration is a sort of storage. And yes, you can argue that it changes the characteristics of the shellfish in terms of the microbiology of the shellfish, but I don't think that that is enough to be able to argue that you've changed the characteristics. So I'm saying that that would not be sufficient. Finally, if you're combining ingredients to make a brand new product, you're doing more than simple mixing there, and that's got to be sufficient process, sufficient production. You know, you're probably packing it using a process that is not simple, such as vacuum packing or gas packing when you put things together like this. Now, okay, some of these operations seem to straddle the line between sufficient and insufficient. And probably these will have to be considered on a case-by-case basis. So these can't be taken as hard and fast rules. What you should consider is, you know, can I argue that it's sufficient, that it needs a special skill, and that, or that it needs specialist machinery. And here are some seafood specific operations that we've been discussing within the regulation team, and we consulted with DEFRA as well on these. And we're pretty sure these will qualify as beyond insufficient, so sufficient, either because they require specialist skills or equipment, or because it's quite obvious that you are producing an entirely new product. And that production is not listed as insufficient. So filleting, production of flaps or wings, skinning, peeling, you need specialist skill and machinery for all of those things. Splitting of frozen fillet blocks into individual fillets. I'm not sure. I'm sure a few frozen fillet blocks come in from Europe and need splitting, but I would say you need special equipment for that. Gases and vacuum packing, that's pretty obvious. And then cooking and all the mixing of ingredients to make a brand new product, those would all be sufficient. So we've talked about the level of production you need for bilateral cumulation to change the origin. And that was just about EU fish being converted into UK fish and vice versa, as shown in the first 4 lines on this slide. Now, what about the last 2 routes on the slide, where you're starting with fish from the rest of the world, and you're doing something to them, production in the EU, production in the UK? Well, will you pay a tariff? And the answer is yes, you will pay a tariff when you move it across the border. Non-EU, non-UK fish cannot become EU or UK fish through sufficient production. And as Fiona said, this applies also to Norwegian and Icelandic fish. It falls outside the TCA. Okay, so there are a couple of exceptions that I mentioned at the start. And these are given in the product-specific rules of the TCA. Now, this is what the seafood product-specific rules are, and this has been, I've copied and pasted it directly from the agreement, from the TCA. I'm sure you're all, you know all the commodity codes inside out by now. So chapter 3 at the top, according to the codes, that covers all live, fresh, frozen, and smoked fish and shellfish, and also cooked shellfish. Any product that you wish to trade that has commodity code starting with 03, it has to be wholly obtained, we know that. So it means you're using fish that's farmed in the UK, caught in UK territorial waters, and so on. So all of that has to be UK fish to send it to the EU. You can't use EU fish in a chapter 3 product unless you go in the cumulation route with sufficient production. Now, commodity code 1604. I mean, chapter 16, that's preparations of meat and fish and crustaceans. But specifically, what interests us is 1604 and 1605. 1604 contains prepared and preserved fish. 1605 contains prepared and preserved shellfish, both crustaceans and mollusks. Now, for most of this, the same rule as for 03 applies. So wholly obtained applies for all chapter 16 fish and shellfish, except for those products that fall under commodity codes 1604.19 and 1604.20. 1604.20 is surimi. 1604.19 is the code for prepared or preserved fish, whole or in pieces, and it includes prepared and preserved white fish, such as cod, coley, hake, pollock, and haddock. It doesn't include pelagic fish. So frozen fish fingers or breaded hake would fall under this code. And why is it special? It's because instead of wholly obtained, it has CC written next to it over there. And CC means production that involves a chapter change from chapter 3 to chapter 16. So what does this mean? It means you can use any old fish as long as you are giving it a chapter change. You can use frozen Russian fish, for example, whether fillets or H&G, and you can make fish fingers in the UK or some other coated product, and you will have a UK originating product that you can, in the sense that you can export it to the EU tariff-free, as if it was a completely UK products. And similarly, in the other direction, you can, in Germany, you can import Alaska pollock via China even. And once it's Germany, it's made into a coated frozen product that can be imported into the UK tariff-free, as if it was a German product. And with 160420, it's the same. It's the same with surimi. You can use fish of any nationality as long as you end up with something that falls under 160420. So to summarize, you can produce coated whitefish or surimi from non-EU, non-UK fish, and that product will end up being of UK origin if you make it in the UK, or of EU origin if you make it in the EU. And you can trade it with the EU or the UK tariff-free. Now, there are two other products that can be made using what they call the alternative product-specific rules. And these are both canned tuna products. And there's a quota attached to these, which is quite unusual. So you can produce up to 3,000 tons of canned tuna with the first product description on the slide. The one with skipjack and bonito sarda species. And you can use raw materials from anywhere, and it will have the origin of the EU if it was canned in the EU. Now, we don't can tuna in the UK, but if we wanted to, we have this option. And there's the second option of canning 4,000 tons of EU tunas. And to give you an idea of the context of this, we imported into the UK canned tuna in a volume that was 100,000 tons under 160414. So you can see 3,000 is really just hardly anything. But of the other type, we will need all of those. We will import around 4,000 tons under 160420 over there. So finally, how do you prove origin? If you've imported under tariff preference, you'll know about the EUR1 forms or Form A and all the problems that come with that, because there isn't the right pattern on the certificate and the right ink color. But with the TCA, you won't need anything as formal as that. But you will need something. So what you'll need is either a statement on origin, or you can claim that you have importer's knowledge. So the statement on origin, this is the template, which I took straight from the trade agreement. And this is what the exporter uses. It can be made out to be valid for a year if you put in the dates up in the period at the top, or you can leave that period blank and just use it on a case-by-case basis, just as a one-off. Now, the exporter reference number that you put in there, that will be the UK EORI number if you're exporting from the UK, or it'll be the registered exporter number, the REX number, if exporting from the EU. And you have to use the statement on origin on the I think it's about £5,700, or if it's that value or higher, you will need a statement on origin. Now, this is the importer's knowledge. If you're using importer's knowledge, you must make sure you have in your possession evidence that the goods qualify as originating. So don't be fooled. Knowledge can be misleading. It's not just knowledge in your head. You actually have to have something in writing in your possession that you can show HMRC. So you need that evidence. So ask the exporter for supporting documentation about the origin. And if you can't get evidence, you can ask for a statement on origin. So even if it's a lower value good, you can have a statement on origin. It's just that probably the European exporter won't have that REX number, but it'll still count. And of course, you have to maintain these records, because even if HMRC don't check straight away, you know, they will come and audit you, and then you'll have to provide the evidence. So that brings me to the end of what I had to say on origin and cumulation. And this is all about economic origin, using the very strict definitions of the TCA, not what you use for labeling, for example. But we have a page on the Seafish website with more information on rules of origin in the trade and regulation area, and we'll be updating that quite soon, I think, well, continuously. And now I think Fiona's already there waiting, so I'll hand back to you and Hannah.
So the first question is for Ivan. Where can I find specific rules concerning the level of processing required to change the origin of tuna loins imported from outside the EU, further processed in the EU, to be of EU origin? And I think you might have just answered that one with a nice little plug for our guide on the website.
Yes, I answered it when I was going on about those alternative product specific rules. So basically, you can't really use non-EU, non-UK fish except in these particular cases. And if you can tuna, there was that example that I showed you where you are allowed a certain quota of tuna that you can. So the only processing, to answer that question, is canning. And it has to be according to the alternative product specific rules, which are in the annex Orig 2A is where it is, of the TCA.
We'll follow on with questions along those lines. So the export to the UK of canned fish from Portugal will be submitted to customs duties. If so, the duties are variable depending on the commodity code, or is it one single customs tax applicable?
You're saying it's canned fish from Portugal. If it is actual Portuguese fish of Portuguese origin, then that can be imported into the UK tariff free. So you do your entry declaration, and that should be covered by the TCA, because it's European fish, it's been processed in Europe, absolutely fine. It can be imported under the TCA tariff free. If it's non-Portuguese fish, so if it's from the rest of the world, maybe it's Moroccan fish, then it's foreign fish, and there will be a tariff involved in that.
Great.
And yes, of course, the duty depends on the HS code. So you say canned fish, you know, it might be, if it's anchovies, it's one HS code with one particular import duty, one particular tariff. And if it's sardines, it might be a different one. If it's in oil or if it's not in oil, those might be different. So it does depend on that code. Yeah.
Okay. Again, following this line, but the opposite way around, we import MSC sardines from UK fisheries to Portugal. What about customs duties regarding this raw material to be processed in our country? Do you want me to repeat it again? Or?
No, I can see it in front of me here. Okay, so again, import MSC sardines from UK fisheries. So it's UK sardines. It goes to Portugal. It undergoes sufficient production. Because it's canned, so if it comes back here, then there's no duty to pay. The raw materials to be processed, again, you know, it all depends on where the raw materials come from. So if you have to import the raw materials into the UK and then send them to Portugal, then there are tariffs to pay. You know, if it's non-UK origin, you're not going to get away from paying, I mean, non-UK and non-EU origin, you're not going to get away from paying a tariff, except if you use one of the special customs procedures that Kevin mentioned right at the start.
So importing lobsters from Ireland, fishing area FAO 27, what is their status?
So we'll go back to the hierarchy of origin, and they, depending if they're caught in Irish waters, which they probably are, they would be Irish lobsters and would be covered by the TCA. Again, if they weren't in Irish waters, say they were in international waters, if it was an Irish boat, then they would be EU lobsters. They would then be able to obviously land into a European port, because a European, or into a UK port, or be imported. So there would be no tariff payable on those.
Great, thank you, Fiona. This one links in with the questions we've just asked Ivan. How do tariffs apply to unprocessed and processed seafood intended for re-export? Is the origin of the catches, brackets UK FAOs, still valid or acceptable when re-exporting the canned items? I know we've covered a lot of this in the session today, but I think it is really useful kind of looking at particular case studies and kind of repeating the rules where necessary.
Again, I think Ivan's already answered this one to a certain extent. So if it's UK fish, which is being canned, if it's UK fish going to the EU to be canned, then that would be a change of origin and it could come back. Or if it was UK fish being canned in the UK, it would go to the EU. So all of that is covered, whether it's UK or EU fish going to the UK or the EU to be canned, that would be covered as a change of origin. So I think that's what you're asking.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, thank you. So we'll go back over to Ivan. Can you confirm whether preferential rules of origin for tuna with Seychelles origin will be lost when the products are imported to Spain, processed in Spain, and exported to the UK again?
Yeah, I know there are lots of special rules about Seychelles origin and that are particular to Europe and particular to the agreement that Europe has with countries like the Seychelles, and particularly to do with tuna. But all of that gets lost when it comes into the UK. So unless you're lucky enough to be able to use one of those Annex Orig 2A rules that we were talking about with tuna, then unfortunately this is just non-UK, non-EU origin fish that's being imported into the UK, and there will be a tariff to pay on that.
And if that was operated the opposite way around, so where the goods are imported into the UK and then to Spain, would that still be the same?
Yes, because that's exactly how it works. It works in both directions. So if you've got non-UK, non-EU fish processed in the UK, once you send it to Europe, there'll be a tariff involved, with those exceptions that I mentioned: the breaded fish, the surimi, and the tuna.
Thank you. So you mentioned in your presentation importers' knowledge. We've had a question asking how this might be regulated by HMRC.
Yeah, now HMRC, they tend not to stand about at the border and block shipments. And the way they work is they will see your entry declaration on the goods, and they will know from that you did use the tariff preference that's in the TCA. So they know that you use that. So if you know how they work, I think, on a risk basis. If they decide to audit you, if they decide to come to you and ask you questions, then they will be asking for proof of origin. And if you say, I've got importer's knowledge, then they'll say, right, show me the evidence that you got from your supplier that backs up your importer's knowledge. And that's how they'll be going about it.
Thank you. another case study for you with regards to sufficient insufficient production. If non-UK origin whole fish is purchased on a UK fish market, the whole fish is then size graded, reboxed and labelled and then sent to the EU for export. Would that be classed as sufficient production?
Okay, non-UK origin. So if it's non-UK and non-EU, then no amount of production will bring it under the TCA. So apart from, you know, the product specific rules. But I'm assuming this will be EU fish. And in that case, grading and reboxing is not going to be sufficient. So this is one of those pretty illogical situations where you would have thought that European fish landed into the UK could just be moved back into the EU. And no, it can't. You know, EU fish that's entered the UK can't just be moved into the EU tariff-free unless it undergoes sufficient production, or unless there's some kind of warehousing operation on the customs, or some transit situation on the customs as well.
Great, thank you. We'll make this one of your last questions for a little bit, Ivan. If frozen, headed and gutted fish imported from Norway, Russia is defrosted and processed, producing IQF fillets or other value-added products, if that is then exported to the EU, would it be classed as UK origin?
Yeah, I'm afraid this is another one where you have products from the rest of the world entering the UK, undergoing production. No amount of production can make them UK products, I'm afraid. The only way you can use rest of the world fish and give it UK origin is by using those product specific rules. So it's limited to surimi, coated products, and those special tuna cases.
Great, thank you. You can have a breather now. So Fiona, we're looking at composite products now. One in particular, for example, marinated anchovy fillets, which is a 160416 code. If the anchovies were caught in the Black Sea fishing area, FAO area 37, and processed in Turkey, would that have EU origin?
So again, depending, the first thing we look at is the catch area, and if it is a territorial water. If we assume it isn't, and it's caught by a UK vessel into the EU, that would be, I think, would be sufficiently processed, Ivan, and then could move back to the UK tariff-free. But if it was in territorial waters, it would then have that nationality. So if it was in EU territorial waters, it would be EU fish processed in the EU, and then it would move to the UK without tariffs.
Lovely, thank you. So we've had this question crop up a few times about EU goods that are currently in the UK. Can they be exported to the EU tariff-free?
No, they can't. This is the annoying part of the TCA. So if you've got EU goods in the UK, the only way they can be returned to the EU tariff-free is if they undergo sufficient processing, and it works the other way as well. So this is really bad news if you're dealing with direct landings, and it's really bad news if you're using the UK as a hub, where you're just storing EU fish that you brought in tariff-free, and then waiting for clients in the EU to ask for it back. You know, that can't be done unless you use customs procedures, and that just makes things a lot more awkward.
Yeah. So can a UK vessel catching fish in EU waters change the nationality of the fish by processing the fish on board?
I would think yes, because you probably, if you're doing sufficient processing, the UK vessel in EU waters would be EU fish when it was on the vessel, but obviously the same as if it was imported, it would be sufficient processing, so therefore it could then go to the UK or the EU without tariffs.
Thank you. If fish is caught in British overseas territories, would that be included in UK origin?
I'm going to have to say, we're going to have to take that one away because I don't know. I don't know if Ivan does, or if there's some DEFRA people on the call, they might be able to answer, but we're going to have to come back to you on that one.
Finally stumped you both.
Have a guess if you like.
So another case study here, and this has come through on the chat during the session. This business takes frozen tuna, slices it into very thin slices whilst it's still frozen to make carpaccio. And there is a special slicing machine used to be able to do that. The offcuts are all minced into tartar or are packed as trim. It's not really a simple process, but how do they find out whether that qualifies as sufficient production?
The problem is, what tuna are you starting off with? So if it's tuna from the rest of the world, then you can't use sufficient production to convert it into UK tuna or EU tuna. So if you've got rest of the world, it's very unlikely that you're going to find a way of giving it UK or EU origin. Now, if you have European origin tuna, then I would say, on the basis of those slides I showed you, that this is sufficient production. Are you producing a completely new product compared to the one you've done before? It's obvious that what are you doing exactly? You're marinating it, aren't you? No, you're not.
No. So
you're just cutting it. Yeah, that is not a simple cutting process. There seems to be a lot of quite skillful cutting going on. So how do you find out whether this qualifies? Again, this has to be on a case-by-case basis, and you have to prepare an argument for HMRC to say, right, this required a lot of skill and a lot of specialist machinery, and it doesn't look like simple cutting.
Just to clarify, Tony's followed up on that question saying that the tuna is from rest of the world.
Well, then I'm afraid that you cannot make it UK origin unless you go and can it.
Lovely. Okay, moving on. If an EU vessel lands in Norway and or the UK, well, we'll just take, if an EU vessel lands in Norway and exports to the EU with insufficient production, is there a tariff because it's the first movement? I would say no if it's Norwegian.
If it's an EU vessel, does it say where it's fishing?
No.
Probably in international waters outside the 12-meter zone, isn't it? 12 miles.
EU fish landing into Norway. Now, the problem with Norway is if it's clearing customs, then it becomes outside of the TCA or the Norwegian trade agreements, but they can use transit. If they would then want to transit from an EU vessel across Norway into the EU, they can use transit.
Great. And if we look at it the opposite, so if an EU vessel lands in the UK and exports to the EU with insufficient production, is there a tariff?
There would be, because if you clear customs, so you clear customs. However, again, you could probably use transit from the EU vessel through the UK into the EU. But if you didn't, if you cleared customs in the UK, it then would be in the UK, and there would be a tariff to move to
Yeah,
the EU.
it's worth saying as well that you can use transit in principle, because we haven't quite yet looked into whether this is actually happening in practice or not, and all the practicalities of using transit for direct landings. So I'm not exactly sure whether that is taking place at the moment, or whether the UK, whether HMRC have it all set up or not, I'm afraid.
Yes, and the 12-mile limit is UK waters.
Have you is that for the last question that's just
Yeah.
So we've had a question from Gavin at Seafish. So this is about Norwegian fish to Poland and then back to the UK, not coated. What are the tariff rules there?
I didn't quite catch it. Norwegian fish going where?
Norwegian fish to Poland and coming back to the UK, not coated. I don't know if Gavin's still on the line.
Yeah, this isn't really part of the TCA, because Norwegian fish is Norwegian fish. So if it comes, it's not EU or UK fish. So if the Norwegian fish goes, again, there will have to be a customs procedure for this to be able to work.
Hi, Ivan. Yeah, just wanted to clarify that it's both ways round from Iceland and Norway. Things coming to the UK from there can't go to the EU without attracting tariffs. But the same goes for things going to Poland and coming into the UK. And then the other one is, I'm assuming inward or outbound processing is the only other method of moving around that.
Absolutely right. Yeah. You're going to have to use inward or outward processing for this kind of operation.
That links quite nicely on to Josh's question that came in just after Ivan's. If Norwegian fish is processed in the EU, could this be imported into the UK under a special procedure such as end use?
And this is a bit different now. You can only import under end use into the UK if you are going to be processing it in the UK. So that end use has to be delivered in the UK.
Yeah. Okay, so we have got to the end of the questions. I don't know if we want to just give it another 30 seconds for any final questions just to come through. See, there's a few coming through now.
I've just seen one from Michael Hansen about raw prawns and chapter change. If the raw prawns are coming from Argentina, then unfortunately that is rest of the world as well. So changing the chapter, sufficient processing, all these things won't be enough to turn them into EU origin prawns and then allow them to be brought into the UK duty free, because you can't use rest of the world raw materials for that.
Okay. Another question from Tony. Frozen tuna destined for the UK, but via the EU, where it is being stored in bond. There is a free trade agreement between the supplying country and the UK, and the goods are eventually imported from the bonded cold store in the EU. Would the free trade agreement still apply? Because the goods are not in free circulation in the EU, would the goods be considered to be in transit?
That's a bit complicated. If the country has a free trade agreement with the UK, then in principle you can bring them into the UK without keeping them in bond. But if you're involving the EU, and then bringing them back into the UK, it's usually that part of the chain where they need to be in bond. So if you can use a customs procedure to move them into the EU and then bring them back into the UK while they're still in bond, then that is how you avoid the tariffs. Does that answer the question, or have I not quite understood it?
I don't know if you can see the chat, Ivan. Tony
Oh
said-
yeah, I can see the chat now. Yeah, sorry, I just found it. So it's in bond while it's in the EU. So yeah, that's absolutely right. So what the bond does is it suspends the payment of any tariff. So that's fine. The way I see it, it goes to the EU in bond, so no tariff there. It comes from that bonded warehouse into the UK. That's where it's due a tariff, but because there's a free trade agreement and that tuna hasn't actually landed anywhere, then there's no tariff to pay. Yeah, that's absolutely, that should work.
Yeah. We'll change the topic ever so slightly. There's a question from Iona. Is there any quantity requirements for the statement of origin? For example, does there need to be a statement per box of fish being exported, or is it one statement for multiple boxes?
There isn't. I did look at the latest government advice on the statement of origin, and there didn't seem to be an absolute minimum where you didn't require a statement if you or importer's knowledge. But what it says is, so if you're going from EU to UK, you can make out a statement by any exporter where the value is 6,000 euros or less. And above that, you need to have the REX number of the exporter in Europe. And when exporting from here to the EU, then you need the EORI number regardless of value. Probably if you're dealing with smaller value consignments, you're probably better off just using the importer's knowledge, but really it's up to you. But I didn't see any sort of minimum amount where you could avoid having some kind of proof of origin.